so far we discussed about the triggers, right? And I think last class we discussed about test classes. I think from the trigger perspective, just to give a recap of what the triggers are. So triggers are the code, the code logic that gets executed when a DML operation is performed on an object. And the trigger events are like before insert, after insert, before update, after update, before delete, after delete, and after undelete. So the trigger syntax is trigger, the name of the trigger on certain object, the name of the object. The reason why you define the name of the object is you're letting Salesforce know, you're letting the platform know that this logic should be executed when a DML operation is performed on that specific object. Okay, so the before insert, after insert, before update, after update, these are called trigger context variables. Then we have seen something called as, I think we also saw the difference between a before event versus an after event. Before event is nothing but like, where the data is traveling from the app server onto the database, whereas the after event is nothing but the data is traveling back from the database onto the app server, and you see the information on it. So that's the difference between before trigger and after trigger. And then you have something called trigger.new and trigger.old. Trigger.new is the new copy of the records that are being inserted or updated. Trigger.old is the old copy or old version. So trigger.old does not exist in insert event. And at the same time, trigger.new does not exist in delete event. The place where both exist is update trigger, where in before update and after update you have the old copy and the new copy of the record. So that's when the you can use the both trigger events. Now, then we saw, we had some couple of examples of writing the trigger, making sure the trigger is working fine. And then we saw in last class, we saw something about test class. So test class is nothing but, so in Salesforce, if you want to deploy something to production, okay, deploying is again nothing but moving the metadata, moving the code or configuration, anything that you build from a test environment into production or from one environment to another is deployment. If you want to deploy the code from a sandbox into production environment, you need to make sure to have at least 75% of code coverage. So 75% for the overall org. When I say 70%, if your org contains like 100,000 characters of code, at least 75,000 characters of code have to be covered using your test class. But the ideal way is to get as much as aim for 100% code coverage or get as much as possible. But your deployment will be successful if overall code coverage is greater than 75%. Okay. Now, what are some of the best practice or some of the things that you need to do in a test class? You should not use see all data is equal to true attribute. Okay. Hey, one thing I just wanted to let you know. See, now I'm talking about, hey, what are some of the best practices? And I'm saying, you should not use see all data is equal to true. You should use system.assert methods. The code coverage should be a byproduct of all. I'm explaining all this. Now, tomorrow, I don't know what your methodology can be. Either after the class is done, you again make notes of it, or just have that idea and just Google some topics related to this and make your own notes. I mean, just do anything that you want, but it shouldn't be a case like this. Somebody might come back and ask a question in an interview. What are some of the best practices that you write in a trigger? Or what is the difference between trigger.old or trigger.new? Or, talk to me something about bulkification. Like, remember we spoke about bulkification. In Salesforce, we have governor limits. So we need to ensure any code that is written is able to at least process 200 records. That's why, so the code should be written in such a way that even if the records are inserted or updated or deleted, either using data loader or workbench or API or manually creating it, your code should be in a position to be able to handle them. So some of the techniques that you follow are, you will never write an SOQL query inside a for loop. You will never perform a DML operation inside a for loop. You will always write queries outside the loop, perform DML operation on collection, like list, rather than individual records. So this is bulkification. Again, we spoke about, people would ask, hey, name some of the trigger context variables that you know. So some of the trigger context variables are before insert, before update, after update, before delete, after delete, after undelete, and then trigger.new, trigger.old. These are all the trigger context variables that Salesforce is providing out of the box for us to use. Now, what people ask me, test class is like a common thing. So, hey, what are some of the best practices that you follow while writing test classes? And the best practices are, you will never use see all data is equal to true, because I think we have seen it. If you use see all data is equal to true, you are relying on the actual data that is in the database. But in a the test class should be independent of the actual data that you are writing in the test, that you are creating in the org. Test class should be in such a way, the test class should be in such a way that the data should be created right within the test class, and Salesforce automatically removes that data once the test class execution is completed. So you need to have a method, like I can show you that. So you need to have a method like, you see, test setup. Like here, you are creating dummy data within the test class itself and making sure to test the data. So we are not using see all data is equal to true attribute. Okay, we are creating the test data within the test class itself. That's number one. Number two is, when writing test class, we need to ensure the code is bulkified. Okay, when I say bulkified, we need to ensure that the test, like the number of records that you are creating within this test class should be more. Like, that's why, for example, if you see, I'm creating here at least 200 accounts to test this. So this way we can ensure that the code will run perfectly fine even without hitting any governor limits. Okay, that's number two. So the test class should be bulkified. Number three, you need to make sure to use methods like system.assert or system.assert equals, or so that means system.assert is nothing but you're validating, like you're expecting some logic. So you're validating the actual functionality of the code rather than just writing the test class for the sake of code coverage. You're actually testing the functionality, or you're actually validating the results that you are getting. This way, the byproduct of a good test class, the byproduct of doing all these things would be code coverage. Okay, if you do all these things, like, if you're bulkifying the data, if you're creating the test data, if you're writing the logic, if you're using system.assert, automatically you will get code coverage. So the the ideal best practice or a good practice is to, when you write a test class, when you do all the things correctly, the byproduct should be the code coverage. Okay. So, and I'm not showing here, but we need to test it as different users, because how do we ensure, like the code, the test class is checking the permission. Right now, because I wrote this class and I'm running it, everything runs as my context, like runs as a system admin. But in reality, records like accounts or contacts, these are created by end users. So we need to create sample test users within the test class itself and use system.runAs. Okay, use system.runAs. There is a method called system.runAs. Use system.runAs to run the test class in the user's context. Okay, so again, these are some of the best practices that you can follow when writing a test class. Test class is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing that Salesforce is ensuring that we are doing the right thing before doing a deployment.
Shravan?
Yes.
Is there a scenario where we have to use CL data is equal to true?
It's very rare. Sometimes what happens is, right now, I think Salesforce corrected those things. When you're dealing with price books, standard price, list price, things like that, right? With some of the standard features, you will not have an option, but you would have to use CL data is equal to true. But I think in some of the recent releases, Salesforce corrected that too. So I don't think there is any scenario where you have to use see all data is equal to true. Now, again, um, but when you have a real case, right? So you would start your test class like this. You would make every attempt to make sure it works like that. If it doesn't work like that, maybe you will add see all data is equal to true. So far, all the code coverage that I've done in last 6 years, I've never used the see all data is equal to true, and I've never even got the scenario where I had to use that. But
So
that's why,
real data, like when we are not able to create our own data, so in
no,
that case, we will be using CR data is equal to true.
not like that. See, there won't be a situation where some data exists in the production arc, but you won't be able to create it, right? You will always be able to create the data, right? In test
Yeah.
class. If so, that's the thing. That's why 99.999% of the scenarios you wouldn't have to use CR data is equal to true. Okay? But I think previously what used to happen was Salesforce has standard price book, right? Like the standard price book and some standard objects, data that is already given to us by Salesforce as part of the platform. There were scenarios where we weren't able to replicate that data or create that data within the exactly. I think you are right, whatever you said. So there might be some data that the platform is giving to us automatically or as part of the package, and we do not have the ability to create that data among ourselves within the API. There are some objects Salesforce won't expose us through the API. That means you will only be able to query that data, but you will not be able to create data yourself. So maybe in those cases, if we are testing some scenario like that, you would probably have to use see all data is equal to true attribute.
So anyway, that data will be same in across all the organizations. So that won't be the problem.
Yeah, mostly it might be. Yeah, or you would have to you would have to write your query in such a way that it's not relying on some specific hard-coded things. Maybe, it varies from scenario to scenario. But most of the times you might be right. It might be same across all the sandboxes.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
So this is about test class. Again, I think if you have taken an exam, I think the question might be, what is the minimum code coverage percentage that is required to deploy some code? Of course, it's 75%. Any questions so far? Okay. Now this is the last topic that I want to talk about. Again, we can discuss millions of examples, but about triggers, I want to talk this last topic and move forward. One trigger to rule all pattern. This is one of the famous design pattern or, most widely accepted design pattern that is used by a lot of companies. So let's see what it is. Okay, let's try to understand what it is. Okay, so on an object, right? Like for example, okay, I'm going to open the dev console. Okay, so this is your trigger. Okay, so this is the trigger. What it is? It is firing in before insert and before update. Okay, now let's say you can write another trigger, right? You can write another trigger on the same account object. Okay, I'll just choose account object. I'll just say account trigger 2. Okay. Okay, let's say I'll write some logic here. So right now on account, we have account trigger and account trigger 2. And this is firing on before insert and before update. This is firing on before insert. Okay. And you can also write before update, whatever it is. So technically, Salesforce is not preventing you from creating multiple triggers on a single object. Okay. So that means you are able to create numerous triggers on a single object. So what's happening? What happens here? Right now we have two triggers. let's even remove this before update. Let me just remove this before update just to avoid confusion. So let's say we have two triggers now. One is account trigger and one is account trigger 2. Both are executing in, both are same thing. Okay, let me just copy this logic. Okay. I mean, I'm putting the same thing here, but you can add some more like. So let's say you are developer 1. Okay, you are one of the developer. Usually development happens in teams, right? In teams of 4 or 5 people. So you are developer 1. So what you're doing is you added your logic like this. Okay, there was another ticket or another user story that is assigned to developer 2, same, and that ticket also needs writing a before insert logic on the account. So the developer, what they did, they go ahead and they create some account trigger 2 on account before insert, and they wrote their logic. Okay. So now there is another ticket comes, another developer, they will write whatever their logic. Okay, they will create another trigger. What is the problem by doing that? Okay, so if we have multiple triggers on the same object, okay, the platform does not guarantee us, okay, the platform as a Salesforce as a platform does not guarantee us that, hey, account trigger will be executed first. Once it's completed, then account trigger 2 will be executed. Once that's completed, account trigger 3 will be executed. Platform is not guaranteeing us that. That means the execution of triggers can be random. That's one of the reasons. Like if you have multiple triggers on the same object, we do not know which trigger executes first and we do not which trigger execute next, and we cannot control the order of execution of triggers. If there are numerous triggers, we cannot control the order of execution of triggers. That's number one. Okay. Number two, you see, it's so confusing for developers, right? Let's say, like I said, the logic is before insert logic. Okay. So developer 1 already have a trigger like this. Okay. Apex trigger, and it's like this. Now the developer 2, rather than writing the whole thing, they can just put the logic, whatever they want to execute with before insert or before whatever they want to execute, they can just add their logic here. If they add the logic, that's it. Rather than creating a trigger, doing all those things, they can just add the logic within the existing trigger, and it will be good. But again, it does not always happen if there is no clear communication, if a lot of people are working, especially in onshore offshore model, and maybe somebody writes the trigger, leaves the project. When a requirement comes, a new developer comes, and the new developer might feel lazy to read the existing code rather than updating the existing trigger. They might just completely put a brand new trigger. So these are all the scenarios that happen. So I mean, as a platform, Salesforce is not restricting you, but Salesforce is saying, hey, it's not a best practice, it's not a good practice to have multiple triggers on a single object. Okay, I mean, when we look at it, yeah, it makes sense, right? Why do we write numerous triggers on a single object? Instead, what Salesforce is saying is have one trigger and make sure the same trigger calls everything. For example, what they are saying is, here is what Salesforce is saying. Okay, I mean, this is one of the best. So what they are saying is, okay, let's just say if Okay. I will, you know what? Let me just finish this so that you can use this as a template. Okay. So here, what they're saying is have, I mean, it's it's one of the best practice and it's widely accepted practice across the Salesforce community. They're saying have all the trigger, like just have one trigger called account trigger. Just have one trigger. Do not have multiple triggers. Just have one trigger called account trigger. Define the name of the object and define all the events present in that. And you see, these are trigger context variables. The trigger dot is insert, trigger dot is before, trigger dot is update, trigger dot is delete. Like, these are all trigger context variables. So we are saying, okay, if it is before insert, look at this statement. I think it's self-explanatory. If trigger dot is insert and is before. So if it is a before insert, execute this logic. If it is after insert, execute this. If it is before update, execute this. If it is after, so we are just separating. Like we are saying there is only one trigger, but within the trigger, what we are saying is we are just separating the events. If it is before insert, perform this logic. After insert, perform this logic. Before update, perform this. After update, perform this. So we are trying to put everything at one place. All the logics that have to happen in the before insert, we are putting in here. All the logic that have to happen after insert logic, that will be there. The logic that have to happen before update, that will be here. The logic that have to happen after update, that will be here. So all the logic, all the different types of logic for each individual trigger event, we are putting them isolated so that whenever a new developer comes, again, we are not restricting. It's Salesforce will not restrict them from creating another trigger. It's just a best practice as a tech architect or as a tech lead or even as a developer. You should be like, whenever there is a requirement to write a trigger, you should always look for, is there any existing trigger on the object? If yes, try to add your logic to the existing trigger, but don't create a new trigger. Okay, so they are saying, okay, like we write one trigger and then have different methods, and each method perform a specific logic, so that whenever there is a requirement for any developer, they'll just adjust their logic, and this logic will be in one place. Okay, so this is one trigger. I mean, this is not completely one trigger to rule out, but this is the concept or idea behind it. This is the concept or idea behind using those trigger context variables. But they take one step ahead and say, you know what, let's not even put our logic in the trigger. Okay, here is what we do. Well, let me keep it here for the sake of now, but I'll just show. So, I mean, this is the idea behind having one trigger per object. But if we just take it a bit forward, let's create an Apex class. Okay, I'll name it as, again, the name can be anything. You can basically name your class in whatever way you want. You can just say, So the reason I'm writing this is you can exactly copy paste this and use it for everything. This is like the template. It works like the template. You can just copy paste this and work like as it is. You just have to change the object name and it works for everywhere. So that's why I'm just finishing this, even though it's taking some time. Okay. So the ideal way is we'll define another Apex class. Okay. Look at the name. I mean, you can name these methods anything that you want. I'm just, I've named them like before insert and after insert like this so that we don't get confusion. So this is an independent Apex class. Okay. We wrote an Apex class. The class will not get executed unless we call, but here is what we will do. Okay. From here, instead of writing the logic here, I'll just do this. I'll be like, I'll just say account trigger handler dot before insert trigger dot new. Okay, and I'll take this logic there. I'll replace the trigger dot new with trigger dot new map. Okay. So I'm going to save this. Okay, guys. You can use, I'm going to copy paste this. You can use this as exact template that can be used in any project anywhere. Okay. So this is the trigger. I'm going to send you the Apex class. You can, this will have an example. You can copy paste it anywhere. So you have a trigger and an Apex class. Okay, let's see what's happening here. Okay. So what we are doing here, see this trigger, like no matter how many triggers you write on any object, it would exactly follow this, except the name here and here would change. Okay. And the handler class corresponding, like the template is exactly going to same. Now look at this. Look at what we are doing here. All we are saying is trigger, account, trigger, on account. We defined all the events. Okay. And what are we doing here? Here we are just saying, hey, if it is a before insert event, okay, make sure to call the before insert method of account trigger handler. Okay. We defined in the account trigger handler, we are just saying, you know, if the trigger event is before insert, make sure to call the before insert method of this Apex class. Okay. If it is after insert, make sure to call the after insert method of this Apex trigger handler Apex class. If it is before update, call the before update method of this. If it is after update, call the after update method of this Apex class. If it is before delete, call the before delete method of this Apex class. After delete. So what we have done is we prepared a template. So the trigger will not even have any logic. Okay. So this is, again, there are other methods as well, but this is one of the widely accepted one trigger to rule all pattern. So what we are doing is we are defining a trigger. Okay. So we're just defining a trigger, and that trigger, all it has is this logic. That's it. We are just using trigger as a dispatcher. Okay. We are not writing any logic within the trigger. We are using the trigger as a dispatcher, just as a dispatcher to invoke an Apex class. Hey, remember one thing. We said trigger is an implicit invocation and Apex class have to be explicit. That means, you see, trigger, you're not doing anything. All you're doing is when a DML operation is performed, automatically this logic gets executed. But what you're doing, we have written a Apex class, and from the trigger, we are just calling that Apex class method. Okay, so this is an Apex class. Account trigger handler is an Apex class. And in this Apex class, you have multiple methods like, you know, there is a method called before insert, there is a method called after insert, there is a method called before update, after update, before delete, after delete, and after delete. So we have different methods that are defined in this Apex class, and all we are doing is from this trigger, okay, all we are doing is from this trigger, we are calling this Apex class method. Okay, so and we have, what we have done is we have neatly divided the trigger into different if conditions. If it is before insert, before update, after update, we have defined into very good, like, you know, all the possible criteria that we have. And then we defined an Apex class. This is just an empty Apex class that we don't have. Now, the rule is whenever we have any logic that has to be added to before insert, it has to be added here. Any logic that has to be added to after insert, it has to be added within these two braces. Because, you know, you won't even, like in lifetime, you won't even have to modify your trigger. Once you write the trigger, see, that's why triggers are so easy, right? Once you know this template, I mean, even if you don't know, you can just copy paste it exactly by changing the name of that, you know, the name, it should work fine. So this is the template that you follow for the trigger. And from this trigger, like depending on the event that you are facing, you will be calling a handler class associated with it. So no matter whether there's a new developer, old developer, it doesn't matter. If you follow this practice, what you can just say is, hey, anytime somebody is writing a trigger, make sure to don't even write a new trigger. Or if there is a requirement where you have to write a new trigger on a brand new object, make sure you already put this logic like this. Okay, make sure you already create this framework and just put it in there. So whenever anybody has a logic that needs to be done, they will come and they will try to add their logic to these methods. Okay, so the pattern, like so people will ask you, hey, what are some of the best practices when you write a trigger? The answer should be, we should only have one trigger per object. Okay, and they will definitely ask you why one trigger, like what is the reason behind it? And you can just say, if you have multiple triggers on the same object, you cannot control, the platform cannot guarantee which trigger is executed first, which trigger is executed next. Like, you cannot control the order of execution of triggers. So, so when they ask what are the best practices, it should be, you cannot have multiple triggers on the same object because you cannot control the order of execution. You can probably write one trigger on the object and call the handler class, like call the effects class methods, and have all the logic in the effects class. Do not write any logic in the trigger. The trigger can be used as a dispatcher. We are just saying, hey, you know what? If it is before insert, go and call this method. Okay, and you will have all the logic written in your method. If it's after insert, go and call another method, and your logic will be there. So it's like that. So we'll be writing one trigger, and there will be a handler class to be able to deal with the trigger. The trigger will not have any actual logic. It is just used as a dispatcher, and the actual handler class will have the logic that you wanted to execute. Okay, and again, of course, the trigger should be bulkified, and to ensure that the trigger works perfectly when data is loaded through data loading or stuff like that. So you can exactly use the same template in other scenarios as well. Any questions? Anybody? Any questions so far?
Shravan, is there we have to mention all the methods as static. Is there any reason?
No, you don't have to. You can. It's just, let's say you didn't mention this, right? Public void. If you mention this,
object in the trigger.
Yeah, you have to create. Again, you have to do this account trigger handler. Okay, which method did I take it off? After insert, right? You would have to say.
So there is no advantage and disadvantage. We can.
Yeah. It's just static gives you more that independence, right? We are just being lazy. So you're just using dot notation to be able to do this. Otherwise, you would have to do this. You would have to just say, instead of the actual dot notation, you would create an instance of that object and then call that. So it works absolutely fine too. There is absolutely no mistake or anything. You see, even this is accepted. This is accepted. I would want to do it like this because I'm not relying on anything. Like it's just more independent. But again, you're right. It's no big advantage or anything. Okay. But you guys understand this, right? You can use this. You can copy paste this. You can use this as a template for anything. No matter whether you are creating a new trigger for an brand new trigger, make sure you create the template and leave it there, so that any developer that have the logic that has to be added in later points of time, they'll come and update their logic in the handler class associated with it. Anybody? Any questions? All right. I want you guys to practice, one or two. Maybe take the same example, review through the chat that I have. Maybe create the same trigger handler class on contact object and try to do one or two examples. Again, don't look. I can give you examples, but there are so many examples out there. Maybe you can do the triggers unit in Trailhead. In Trailhead there is triggers unit, and probably you could try to write the exercises that they have given or practice the examples that they have given, which is a good place because there are triggers unit which they cover everything. But again, in order to move forward from the topic, if you have a specific question on an example, like Niranjan, I think you have been asking me those. So if you have a question on an example, I can clarify you. But I mean, I think I've given the background on what are trigger context variables, why it is, how it is executed, the one trigger to rule out before. Like I think I've given all the enough information that are needed for the to write. We'll see some examples later if you have some time. But while we are still in the discussion of triggers and what's going on, I want you guys to do those Trailhead modules that are related to Apex triggers. So you get to practice other examples and you get to ask me questions in case you are, in case you are stuck or anything like that. Okay. Any questions? Anybody? All right. I have to go on something, but we will have the class tomorrow too. I will talk about batch epics, like why we need batch epics and why to. I mean, I'm hurrying this a little bit because I want to start lightning components. Because that's the major piece that's been going on right now in the market. So that's why I want to get to the lightning components piece so that I can take at least 4 or 5 sessions on lightning components before you get into the market. So I'll do the batch job tomorrow, the asynchronous epics, and maybe over the weekends I'll start on the lightning component framework. So yeah, again. Please do the Apex class and triggers unit in. Again, there is test classes as well. I think in Trailhead, if you look at, there is Apex triggers, Apex test classes, Apex testing, and also Apex classes. So if you with this knowledge that you have, if you look at those modules, hopefully a lot of things will get cleared up. And I mean, of course, feel free to ask me or send me an email about a question that you have. Okay. I'll see you guys tomorrow, probably around the same time.